Let me begin by saying, first of all, hello and thank you for coming. My name is Matthew Roach. I'm a program manager on the Power BI customer advisory team. A lot of what we do as a team is helping our enterprise customers, like the biggest customers, the biggest companies in the world, succeed deploying, managing, and using Power BI at global enterprise scale. A lot of this recently for me has included working with those customers' centers of excellence or the people responsible for adoption inside those customers and learning from them what it is that they do that enables them to be successful, or even for some, learning what they're trying and failing to do. And I've recently been trying to get more of this information out and available to the public so that not only are we making Power BI better as a tool, we're also making it easier for organizations to succeed rather than needing to reinvent the same wheels over and over again. As Robert mentioned, I have spoken in the UK a couple times. Robert mentioned the other time that wasn't at PASS that I took my shirt off on stage was during the BI Power Hour at SQL Bits back in 2015, 2016, somewhere along those lines. It's chilly today, so please expect me to remain fully clothed. And from a personal perspective, I do tend to travel both for Man-O-War concerts or Man-O-War festivals or Man-O-War tours or the best heavy metal band ever. And I also tend to have travel for longsword tournaments or other historical European martial arts events. The fact that we don't travel at all this year meant that I had to decorate my home office to reflect more of my personal passions. In any event, it works out pretty well. With no further ado about me, let's learn about you. So please open your browser, or if you already have the Slido app installed on your phone, please open the browser or the app, head over to Slido, enter the event code of E737. And it looks like some of you are here already. We've got two quick polls to kick things off. First of all, I'd love to know, what do you do? So when you're thinking about building a culture with Power BI, when you decided that you would join this session today, and I know there's more than 6 people that are on the call, so head over there. We definitely want to hear from you because this is also where you're going to do Q&A today. But what's the role that you have working with Power BI inside your organization or as a consultant working with the other organizations that you support or that give you money? So it looks like we've got as many consultants and BI developers as everybody else combined. If you are a technical decision maker or business decision maker, so full disclosure, it's the decision makers that have the power and the easier path to do a lot of the things that I'm talking about today. So if you're a developer, you will have smaller or shorter levers through which you can apply pressure on the broader organization, just getting that hard truth out of the way up front. So for the second poll, and this is kind of a subjective score, so use whatever criteria that you want to use. But on a scale of 1 to 10, how mature is your organization's data culture today? And a lot of what I think about this maturity comes from the fact that most organizations start off doing things in an unplanned, often chaotic way. And typically, when the pain of doing things the old way becomes great enough, that's when they start thinking about changing the way that they work to better solve those pain points and have a more structured or more consistent way of working with data, which is where a lot of the data culture maturity comes from. And it looks like there is a pretty strong 3 and 4 on the 10 scale, which honestly is where a lot of organizations are trying to get. So good on you. And for those who are already further down as well, would love to hear, time permitting at the end of the session, how well the things that I'm describing in this presentation relate to the things that you have done, the things that you've tried, and the places where you've succeeded or failed in your efforts with the data culture in your organization. And then at any point during the presentation, please feel encouraged to use the Q&A in Slido to submit a question or to vote up on the questions that other participants have submitted, because when we break for Q&A, we'll actually be using that prioritized list in Slido that you've submitted and that you've voted on to decide what gets the priority for the conversations, because I do have a hard stop at the end of the hour. So with no further ado, let's talk about what we mean when we say data culture. And I'm going to try not to read any of the slides. I'm certainly not going to read this one, but I Googled culture, and this is one of the definitions that came back. I like to think about a culture in very much these ways, but to generalize it, a culture is defined by the things that its members do. So when you're thinking about the differences between the US and the UK, or thinking about like Italian coffee culture versus Seattle coffee culture, and none of these have to do with data, but when you think about these things, you realize that there are certain behaviors that are common or prevalent or ubiquitous in one group or one country or one company that aren't the same in others. That culture is defined by the norms and the behaviors of what people do as a group. A keyboard focus there. So the next thing, of course, is how does this relate to data? And this is the beginning of the Wikipedia page. So again, like super generic on the slide, but a data culture is essentially saying that, and I see that my video has stopped working. So while I'm talking, I will try restarting that as well. But basically, a data culture is a culture where more people work with more of the right data in the right ways consistently to align with the goals of the organization, so that the company can have more data-driven insights as more parts of its day-to-day operations without relying on tribal knowledge and the specific expertise of individuals. So more data, less hunches, more repeatability and predictability, and less relying on someone knowing someone or having past experience in an area. And as we think about a data culture, we also need to think about what a data culture is built on from a technical foundation perspective. So business intelligence is a key to a data culture because it's the set of technical products, features, and behaviors that allow an organization to do the things that we just talked about, so make data-driven decisions. But the specifics of business intelligence today mean that the steps that we need to take to build and evolve a data culture in 2020 or 2021 are very different than they would have been 5 or 10 or 20 years ago. Because back when I was Robert's age, so I think Robert and I are probably the old folks that are on the call, it was really rare to have reporting outside of an application. So your data came with a specific application that was made to put data in and get data out, and the need to have reporting outside was like this specialized thing back in the 80s. And when we started to have more and more transactional systems, so more and more of these OLTP systems, the need to have reporting that got data from multiple source systems was a unique, emerging, and complex problem domain. And this is really what the data warehousing pattern, which includes data lakes for modern data warehousing today, as well as capabilities like data preparation or ETL, and the evolution to support more users making more demands on this system, the evolution of OLTP or analytics optimized systems. And if I'm looking at this high-level diagram through a Microsoft lens, we've got SQL Server on one side, we've got SQL Server Synapse maybe in the middle, maybe Azure Data Lake for some of the unstructured or big data stuff, and then we have analysis services or Power BI Premium or some similar in-memory analytics model towards the right, and then we've got Power BI for reports and dashboards. But 20 years ago, we had this exact same pattern, but with different technologies that were filling the different roles inside there. So we had OLAP services and custom applications further to the right. And one of the biggest changes in the last 10 to 20 years has been the evolution and emergence of self-service business intelligence. And I realize that this is all like simple stuff that everybody knows, but it's foundational to thinking about building a data culture. The problems that self-service business intelligence emerged to solve were grounded in the fact that business needed data to make business decisions, and IT was the bottleneck. That reporting department or the data team or the database guys in IT, they couldn't keep up with the pace and the complexity of requests for new reports or new data, new changes to enable business to truly be agile and competitive. So self-service BI is solving the same problems, but for the most part, it is enabling people with more business domain expertise and less technical tool expertise to deliver and maintain the solutions to those problems. Now, this solved the problems that it was trying to solve. So IT is much less of a bottleneck now, or is a bottleneck in different ways, but it also introduced new problems. And those new problems often revolve around duplicate data, Excel hell, more silos, no oversight into who's doing what, inconsistent results from report to report. I assume this is going to be familiar to everybody that's on the call. Those are some of the problems that emerge from self-service BI. And in a lot of organizations, there's sort of a pendulum that swings back and forth between more control or less control, depending on what fires are coming up. And that's really where the need to build and maintain a data culture comes in. And I want to start with what is both the least exciting and most important aspect of building a data culture in any organization. And that is the sad fact that without an executive sponsor, your efforts will not succeed. So that's my PowerPoint animation of a microphone dropping. So that's the mic drop. I'm done. So I will go on. The key thing here, the executive sponsor is going to be your ally and both your stick and your carrot. I'm not sure if that phrase is going to translate to an international audience, but basically, if you do have an executive sponsor, the executive sponsor and his or her authority is going to define the scope of the culture that you're building. It's kind of like, boy, I really don't want to get into any sort of politics in 2020, either for the UK or for the US, but the leader defines who gets to make the rules and what the rules are and how the things work, right? So the executive sponsor that you have helping and driving and supporting and crediting the work that you do, that we'll talk about in the sections after this, if you go outside of that scope, you'll have less support and more struggle and more trouble. And the analogy that I put on the slide here is basically that if you don't have an executive sponsor, because there's probably 50% of the people on the call that are listening to me right now and saying, oh no, I can do this. That might apply to other people and other organizations, but I know that if I just try hard enough, I can make a difference. That may be true, but everything is going to be harder than it needs to be. And even though you may be personally motivated enough to do everything the hard way, in order for the culture to grow and succeed, it needs to be not just you, but everyone contributing towards these well-defined goals. And without that executive sponsor, it's going to be harder for you. And when you give up and move to another role, every success that you have made is going to be undone because there's only one of you. So if you have to drop off the call, you've heard the most important thing here. And also, I am officially too old to use a Nintendo meme, but it was the only way that I could figure out to incorporate a sword into my slide deck. So that's the meme. So we're going to have two sections for the building the data culture core contents. We sort of established some foundational topics and truths to start with. We're going to start off with the easy part, and then we're going to do the hard part. And the easy part is the technology, but just foreshadowing, the hard part is going to be people. So the easy part is basically figuring out what are the battles that we fight and what are the battles that we let go. Where do we need to manage more tightly, and where do we need to manage more loosely, if at all? And I'll share links and I'll share the slide deck afterwards, so all of the materials will be shared with you. But I want to highlight this diagram I have stolen shamelessly from the Power BI adoption framework, which is a set of guidance related to building and maintaining a large-scale Power BI implementation, including data culture aspects. And one of the things that the adoption framework emphasizes, which is very true, is that there are some BI applications, some data, some work streams that require this tight oversight and controls, the constant auditing and verification, having assigned data stewards and business stewards and SLAs and formal support and all of the things that a critical business system needs. You're still going to have those. But at the same time, there are some things like giving users access to Excel and Power BI Desktop or other self-service tools, enabling them to do their own personal reporting and analytics, or team level or project level or similar things. These probably don't need any oversight at all most of the time. If there are problems, they can be organically identified and resolved. And then in between, there's going to be the medium scale, like department level or group level reporting, where there actually is a question: how much of this do we need to lock down? Is it okay to have different people using different data in this particular domain, or do we really need to standardize? At this point, you need to define for your organization where that line is going to be. And honestly, where it ends up doesn't matter. So it could be all the way at the top, it could be all the way at the bottom. These are all possible paths to success. The thing that is important, the thing that is absolutely vital, is that everybody that needs to agree agrees that this is what the line is, and these are the criteria to decide how much management a given data source, a given data point, a given application requires, and who is responsible for the management and the use and the auditing and the validation. Those consistent roles and responsibilities are going to be key throughout here. And you can see again why having an executive sponsor is going to help you even with the technical stuff. The next few slides are going to be showcasing the pattern that I see successful global enterprise Power BI customers using. And this first one is sort of a generic high-level view, where inside an organization, they will define a number of tiers, and there's typically 3 or 4. It's very, very rarely do I see variations from this. But it doesn't need to be complicated. But basically, at the outer tier, like, everybody gets data. So like, there's data for you, and there's data for you, and there's data for you. I can't do Oprah well, but everybody gets Power BI Desktop, and they can do whatever they want to with visualizations, with analysis and mashups, and doing their data modeling to figure out what they need for their own purposes. But they probably don't get a pro license. They can't share into the service. Or for those organizations that have an Office 365 Enterprise E5 license, everybody has a pro license so they can share as they want to, but there's not a lot of oversight and governance because the assumption is if I share something that I created for myself, it's going to be useful to me or a very small number of people that I work with closely. Moving up from there, there is a standard need for team-based self-service BI. So I mentioned earlier that I have one of my teammates, Venkatesh, that's on the call. So it's awesome to see you, Venk. If I wanted to do reporting to share with just the rest of my team, so like somewhere between 10 and 20 people, for Power BI, this would typically mean me having a pro license and all of the other consumers having a pro license, and probably we'd all be sharing with each other, and probably we'd all be working with similar or overlapping data because we are on the same team. But when we get up to a larger scale, both from a licensing perspective, having a premium capacity allows more broad sharing, and the broad sharing brings with it greater impact from misuse. So if I do something wrong and I share the wrong number with myself, I'm the only one that makes wrong business decisions. If I share it with 10 people or 100 or 10,000 people, the broader the scale, the greater the impact of using the wrong data or using it in the wrong way. So typically, if we go up to this departmental scale, these successful organizations, they have gates to deployment. So in order to get permissions to deploy to this premium capacity, you need to complete this Power App or Forms Pro survey, letting us know what's the data that you use and have you followed these best practices and what is the business justification. There's a lot of variation, but the basic thing is you make them work for it. You don't just say, oh, here's my spam call coming in. Time to turn off my phone and my speaker. But basically, we have some gates to make it so that everyone who has the ability to share more broadly, that they need to do some typically trivial work to earn that privilege because of the risk that comes with it. And then all the way at the center, so the smallest number of applications, they also tend to be the highest value or highest impact applications. Even though you're building on Power BI, it's an enterprise BI platform as well. And very often there is this central BI team that is responsible for going through this full application lifecycle of working with business stakeholders and coming up with requirements and a design, and then having this incremental deployment and evolution over time with an SLA, with a project plan, with a change management board, with all of the things that you would expect a mature data delivery organization or BI delivery organization to have, but it's part of the bigger picture. And let me click again here. Let me do that. There we go. So, and every organization is going to have their own variation on this. So these labels are essentially how one specific Power BI customer that I worked with last year, I think it was, described their tiers, where they basically say any user can work with data without any restrictions. And they are a retail organization. So I think they're only based in the US. I'm not going to name them, but they're not someone that you are likely to have heard of. But basically, they have a whole bunch of retail stores, but literally any employee who wants to work with data, they can get Power BI Desktop, and they have a whole set of shared curated data sets that they're assigned permission to because every employee has an Azure Active Directory account. When they're hired, they're put into groups and the permissions flow from the groups. So even if I'm like the floral department manager or the butcher department manager for a given store, I can connect to Power BI Desktop and do analysis on data that I have permission to access. I don't need to ask anyone, it just works. And in this organization, they have a few departments that, because of the nature of their business, they have higher analytics needs or more complex needs. For these organizations, they get more data and they will typically get more training and guidance up front, but they're still just end users. And then in each department or at each scope inside the business, they also have a set of power users that are the traditional business analysts or data analysts that have more tools, more support, typically beefier laptops and so on. And they are the ones who work with the other users, as well as working with what this organization refers to as the hardcore IT group. This is their central BI team that develops the BI applications that the entire business runs on. It's like giant multi-billion-dollar business. This hardcore IT team both develops the traditional way, and they work with users from across the business to operationalize the self-service work that's been done. So this is where the line in the pyramid view or the triangle view, this is where the line can move, because a given application, as it evolves over time and as the business changes over time, there's often a need for something that started out as a personal app to become a team or group or departmental or enterprise app, because life keeps changing on us. And in this organization, they basically have a 4-step promotion process with well-defined requirements for each phase and going from one to another to another. So anybody, typically the power users, but anybody can come to IT and say, I've got this idea and I'd like to include this into the enterprise model so that I don't need to maintain my self-service thing. And there is a group that will basically, an IT group that will attach themselves to this business opportunity. They'll explore things, they'll prove out ideas, and then they will basically decide, is this worth moving forward with? And if it's not, that's fine. You know, the self-service will always have a place. Not everything needs to be promoted, but if it is going to be promoted, they will work with their enterprise gateway team, because they have a dedicated team managing gateways and data sources. They will get a scheduled refresh. They will get the report aligning with corporate practices for colors and theming and so on and so forth. And once that's done, they'll reevaluate and they'll say, now that we have this thing running in a more supportable and repeatable way, does it make sense to actually make it fully operationalized? Because at this point, the data still lives where it used to live. Maybe it's an Excel or a SharePoint list, who knows? But they now have an application that is better fit for purpose because of this IT love that it's gotten. If it does move forward, they will move the data into a supported source. They'll put it into Azure SQL DB as their default. They'll work on documentation for the increased user base. They will identify business and technical and support owners. So they basically get all of their ducks in a row, and then they will operationalize it by including it in their standard suite of applications, or by including this data into an existing application, and then they're done. And at any given time, they may have 3 or 4 or 20 of these different projects going through these well-defined steps at different times. And there is, in addition to this general customer learned insight, there is also a standard pitch that my team will do. So if we are doing an executive briefing, like talking with the data leaders at an organization to help them understand how Microsoft works with data and how we use our own tools successfully with well over 100,000 monthly active users of Power BI, this is one of the slides that we show. And the key thing, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the key thing is that we had a Wild West data cowboy culture at Microsoft. Everyone was empowered to make their own decisions and do their own things, and it allowed us to be agile and successful, but it introduced problems, right? Lots of different data, same label, different numbers. Meetings would start with, well, I'm not sure if those numbers are right. Where did you get that from? And then half an hour into an hour-long meeting, you haven't even begun yet because you're arguing about the data. It's a very familiar challenge. And what we've done with Microsoft and Chewy, definitely don't feel bad. So I can see the comments coming in chat as well. This is a natural progression, and everyone is in the same boat to one extent or another. And when I talk about Microsoft's BI strategy of having discipline at the core and flexibility at the edge, where there are these well-defined, agreed-upon data sets. So with the taxonomy or hierarchies, with all of the data that's validated and supported, with teams of people, like dozens of people whose job it is to make sure that these BI applications are always up and always running and always correct and supported, we have that. But at the same time, we recognize that outside of this core that always needs to be right all of the time, we still need those cowboys. We need the data users that are empowered and supported to go out and find their own data, to work with it without needing approval or handholding or the like. And it really does tie the whole end-to-end thing together, just as we saw in the triangle diagram from the adoption framework. Some things need more management than others. There's lots of ways to do it successfully. The key thing that is non-negotiable is ensuring that everyone that needs to agree agrees where the management is needed and where it is not. So that's the easy part. Let's look at the hard part. And the hard part, of course, is people. So a culture is defined by the actions and behaviors of its members. And a data culture is a culture that encourages and rewards people working with the right data in the right ways to solve their business problems. Now, in order to do this, there are very often two primary groups of users that you will need to locate or establish in order to keep the culture moving forward. And on the left-hand side of the slide, which is going to be sort of at the center, is, oh, yeah, I guess it does say center, doesn't it? But a center of excellence. And there's lots of ways to do this. So it could be one core group. It could be a distributed network of excellence. So if you have tens of thousands of monthly active users of Power BI across dozens of subsidiary corporations, 24 hours a day for time zones around the world, having one center of excellence may not do what you need. Having multiple self-supporting centers of excellence aligned with the way that your business runs is typically the way that we see this at a global scale. But for most organizations, if you're not Microsoft scale, a center of excellence is often a single group or a single unit. And a successful center of excellence includes the key business and IT stakeholders. So I often like to ask, who gets promoted if Power BI succeeds in your organization? Or the other way to ask the question is, if Power BI doesn't succeed, who's going to get fired? And those are the people that have the real stake in establishing a center of excellence. It's also the people that own the data, they own the systems, they own the business processes. They're the decision makers that are relying on their employees having the right data at the right time. And often they're the people who have the budgets to fund different activities, because if people aren't willing to fund it, that is how they tell you that it's not important to them. And this isn't something that I was planning to say, but since it has come out, it's worth emphasizing. Business organizations express their priorities through what they fund. If someone says to you, oh, this is really important, why don't you go work on that? And you go back and you ask them for licensing money or training money or an additional person to hire to join the team, and they say, no, we can't really fund that, that's the way to say that they're not really the sponsor that you thought that they were. But that center of excellence is where the knowledge and the help resides. So these are the people who need to provide resources and assistance to the broader community of practice. And the community of practice is the other part of the equation here, because not everybody needs to be an expert, right? Not everybody needs to be the center of excellence in their given domain, but the community typically involves people who are trying to solve their problems with data, people who have solutions to those problems. So maybe someone's like, oh, I used Power Query last month and I solved this problem in this way. Here, let me help you. The champions who rise up to learn more about the tools and the technologies than they need to, even though they're working in the business role, find ways to help them and encourage them to do more to help their peers and the other people with problems. And it's the people who run that center of excellence, the IT and business people that run the center of excellence, that are doing that encouraging and that rewarding. And of course, your community of practice needs to have someone that owns it. And this will often be reflected through people in roles like either a moderator or a steward of the community, the people that make sure that when someone comes in with a question, that the people with the answers are identified and brought in. And I love Chewy's comment here. It takes a village. It absolutely does. It's not something that one person or one group can do in isolation if you want to grow that culture. And these two things, establishing a center of excellence, you may have one already. So very often there are people working in isolation, owning the business processes, owning the systems. They just may not be talking to each other yet. So Craig, do you want to jump in? I saw your hand up for a second.
Sorry, clicked the wrong button, Matthew. Sorry about
that. It does happen from time to time as well. And Teams keeps moving the buttons around, so let's blame them and not you.
Apologies.
No worries at all. So as I was putting this deck together, it really leapt out at me that for most of the people that are likely to attend a user group presentation on a Thursday evening, this is going to be above your pay grade, right? How many of you get to go to the finance director or the sales and marketing VP and say, I need funding for this or that or the other thing, or I need your people to align with my program? This is where that executive sponsorship really starts to come into play, because with an executive sponsor, very often on the finance team, I don't want to call finance out too much, but if there's one team in more organizations that is leading the drive to have a data culture, it's finance. And Venkatesh, he had mentioned that he was dropping off the call, but I am going to put him on the spot here. He used to work as an architect for Microsoft Finance on the Finance BI team, and now he is on the Power BI product team working with customers around the world. The expertise that you build up working in finance with the data is often generally applicable at broader scale as well, but that's enough of the finance aside. So we're talking about the hard part. We're talking about people to build that culture. There are a few things that you can do or that you can know that will make things easier. So one of them is that you need a portal. And it doesn't matter whether it's in Teams or in Slack or in SharePoint, or if you have a Power BI report that has everything in it. I've actually seen multiple customers that build a single Power BI app using data pulled from the Power BI service and other sources to make everything more discoverable and understandable. But the most important thing is that all of the people that are in your organization that could be using more data more often, the reason that they're not doing it today is because it's too hard. And I'm not saying that it's hard. I'm saying that right now, the reason that they're not changing the way that they work is because the way that they work today is good enough for them. So until the pain of changing is less than the pain of not changing, nobody changes ever. This is just kind of human nature, right? This is the way that I do things. Why would I change? And the sweet spot, and this sounds awful to say out loud, but the sweet spot to build a data culture, to get the sponsorship and the buy-in, is when everybody's life sucks. So when the data is all wrong and people are working nights and weekends trying to figure out the root problem of the downstream effects of having bad data or data used in the wrong way, or when people are losing business, or organizations are losing business because it takes them too long to get those insights. If we think about the pain at a broader scale, this is a moment of opportunity. When life sucks, people are more willing to change in ways that they are not willing to do when life only sucks a little. And one of the ways that you can help tip the balance between changing is too hard and changing is easy enough is by having one location where users across the organization can go for community, for connections, for training, for information, for guidance, for data, for people. So if you have that portal, which can grow over time, you have the portal, you put all of the resources that you can think of into that one location, and then when people send you an email or an IM or whatever, however they reach out to you directly, you basically say to them, wow, great question, go to this portal here, the answer is already there. You build the habit of people to look there first by putting the resources that they need and telling them there. And I ratchet this up, and I feel like, and since the recording is just for me, I will say it, I'm the asshole here. So if you email me asking me a technical question, I will not give you the answer. What I will do is I will say, go to this place where my team supports and provides this sort of answer. And if you really need me, then tag me and I will go and I will answer you there. But I'm not going to give you an answer via email because I don't scale as an individual one-on-one support person. And this happens probably once or twice a day where some Microsoft person sends me a data flows question. I'm like, nope, not going to answer, go over here. But the key thing is, I know that the answers that they need are there. And by driving traffic and activity and knowledge there, it gets it becomes a center of gravity to pull more content and more activity and more interaction so that people want to go there. And because it's in one location, every answer that's provided in one situation becomes part of a growing knowledge base for all others who have that future question, or at least those that bother to search to see what's available. The other aspect of the human part of the problem is one of motivation. And I have an entire video, so I'm going to link to my blog and video series about building a data culture at the end. So I've got like a 20-minute video on this, but I want to basically point out that there are things that you can do to motivate adults to contribute in constructive ways. And the three different circles in the middle are the three primary motivators for most adult humans. They want skill variety, which basically means I don't want to do the same thing all day, every day. I'm not working in a data factory, data factory joke. So I'm not working in a factory. I'm doing this intellectual, creative work that is rewarding because I get to do lots of different things. There is task identity. So task identity is basically saying, I know how the work that I am doing contributes to the broader whole. So if I am adding metadata to a system and I see it come out in reports, or I see it on a slide that the executive has shared, or I know that it's feeding into this downstream process, that task identity makes it more likely that I will put in the time to enter that metadata up front. Whereas if it just went into a black hole and I didn't know where it was used, it would just be a tax to me and I'd be less motivated to do it. And the final circle is task significance. So task significance basically says the work that I'm doing is making life better for someone, or it is making the world better. So if I know that I can spend 5 minutes and save somebody else 5 hours or 5 days, I'm going to spend that time. And if I know that the work that I'm doing as part of this data culture, answering questions or providing guidance or resources, or spending my lunch hour doing a lunch and learn session, things along those lines, if I know that it's making people's lives better, I'm more likely to do it. And then the two things that are on the side, the arrows pointing up, people want more autonomy. They want to be able to choose what they do, when they do it, and how they do it. And they want feedback as well, right? So they want people to let them know when they're doing well or where they might do better. All of these things, it's really super common sense. When you say it out loud, you realize that you knew it already, but you probably are not applying it mindfully to building a community of practice around data in your organization. And those are the things that will keep people coming back and do the work that they otherwise might not be doing. And we've got a few wrap-up topics. I see Craig, thank you very much, posting the link going back over to Slido, where we will do our questions in our Q&A. But I want to basically point out, this is my favorite quote. It was in the introduction of an object-oriented programming and design book that I was assigned to read in college, but because I was an awful student, I never actually read it in college. But when I got a job in IT and was leading a development team back in the 90s, I probably read it 2 or 3 times. And this quote was at the beginning, and it's the one thing that I'm going to read verbatim. But a complex system that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simple system that works. The inverse is also true. A complex system designed from scratch never works and cannot be made to work. And this is a bold statement that to me basically says, start small and grow. The most common question I get is basically, well, where do I start? Well, start where you are. So I mentioned at the beginning, you can't succeed without an executive sponsor. We're going to circle back around to that. But basically, the place where you are, you can do something today based on where you are. And a lot of the direction that you go in comes down from the strategic direction that you are able to define and get buy-in from your peers, from your leaders, from your executive sponsor. Sun Tzu says that strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. So if you know where you need to go and you don't know how to get there, that's okay. You know what the goal is, as long as everyone is aligned, you can take steps, reevaluate, get more and more directionally correct over time, and you'll eventually get to where you want to go, as long as you know where you're going, as long as you know that strategic goal. But tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. So he was talking in a military context, but if you think about the developers, like, oh no, I don't need a spec, just let me write the code, or let's skip the meetings and let's just build something. Those things are not useful, and they might solve a small problem, but they're not going to get you closer to the destination that will actually result in a successful and mature data culture. And then the final thing, I think that this is the final slide that I have in the bulk of the deck. But basically, there's no map to give you. There's no instructions, because your starting point is unique. Like, your organization is the only organization like it when you take into account people and politics and history and systems and processes, and the definition of success that you have is also unique. So there is no other organization that has the same goals and the same strategic challenges, and you have different resources, you have different constraints. The landscape is not only different, but it's also constantly changing because it's the real world. And sort of threw this in with a sarcastic smile at the end, but you are a special snowflake. Every app is a special snowflake. Your organization is different from every other organization that are out there, but all of the patterns that we discussed here are applicable to organizations large and small, more and less mature. So I'm going to leave this slide up, and let me emphasize I will be sharing both the slides and links with the organizers, so I'll put them up on my blog and make sure that everybody has them. But the Power BI CAT team has both general guidance around building a center of excellence and a deeper exploration of what Microsoft has done. We also have a 300+ page enterprise deployment white paper that includes a lot of topics and a lot of content that is helpful for this discussion. Over the course of this year, I have written and recorded a 17-part series of blogs and supporting videos on building a data culture that's a little bit over 3 hours, and I've cannibalized it for this shorter talk. And I also used as one of my inputs that Power BI adoption framework that I mentioned towards the beginning. This is another Microsoft-produced resource that has content on GitHub, so like files that you can download on GitHub, and also multiple hours worth of video content on the official Power BI YouTube channel. And the final thing that I want to mention is that we recently released, as part of our Power BI Customer Stories series, a story from Nestle, which is one of the biggest companies and the largest consumer goods company in the world, if I understand correctly. It may be the largest food company. But Nestle has over 45,000 monthly active Power BI users. So let that sink in for a second. So they started much smaller, but they've basically taken this approach and the Power BI and Azure Cloud Data Platform, and they have scaled to put most or all of their BI workloads into Power BI, and Robert is like 45,000. It's like, yes, it's a huge thing, and they have information both about their organizational journey and the technical journey to achieve their current state. So definitely be aware that that there are others who have gone down the path before us, and learning from them often just requires listening. So this is the time to go over into Slido if you choose to, but the answer for Chewy, would I say that data culture is actually linked, or is linked to the actual culture in an organization? It is an aspect of that actual culture. And you can't decouple the two, so it's not just that it's linked to it. The data culture is just it's a part of the broader culture that you can choose to focus on. If I think about Microsoft, so I've worked at Microsoft for a little over 12 years, and I was an external like consultant, et cetera, for over a decade before that. So I've sort of built my career around Microsoft's data tools. But when I joined Microsoft is at the end of the Bill Gates era and the beginning of the Steve Ballmer era. And honestly, I did not fit in. I was like, there was a top-down culture that was being defined that didn't recognize and reward the type of collaborative team behaviors that I want to do. So in order to get the promotion and the recognition, back in the old Microsoft days, your team needed to win over another team, and you needed to win over another peer in order to get the promotion, the bonus, the stock reward, etc. And there's a lot of public information about this, so I'm not like sharing anything super secret. But when Satya Nadella took over as the CEO of Microsoft, he basically changed the culture from the top down. One aspect of it was this is explicit recognition of we succeed when our customers succeed, and we succeed by helping others do more, like others inside of Microsoft do more. And that top-down culture change for the company included an emphasis on a data culture with more doing more business. I'm not sure where more business came in, but more people doing more things with more data. So would I expect that an executive sponsor be an existing senior employee with other responsibilities? Yes. In an ideal world, it would be your CEO or some other C-level executive. The most common things that I see are an organization that does not have a chief data officer today. They will hire a chief data officer as a recognition that data is an asset that they need to start taking more advantage of and getting more value from. And if there is a CDO, very often the CDO is a highly involved executive sponsor with all of the responsibilities of that position. The other common pattern that I see is that it is the chief finance officer or another similar finance executive, because very often the data culture gets its first deep roots in the finance org, because finance is very data driven by the nature of the discipline, and then it will grow out from there as the finance executive shows his or her success to their peers across the organization and others want in. But yes, it's another executive or a senior employee or executive with other responsibilities, because those other responsibilities are what give them authority and what gives them budget. So it's typically not someone new. If it is someone new, that is a red flag that you should be aware of and keep your eye on very closely. How would I break in an organization that is all Excel? How do you create a sponsor? You can't. It's hard. I'm trying to think of a useful, actionable response here. The key thing is, until there is enough pain that comes from doing things the way that you're doing today, getting that organizational level change is just not going to be it's not going to be easy, because if you go to someone for budget, they need to take money away from somewhere else to give it to you, because they have a finite bucket to work with, no matter how far up the food chain they go. And if they're using Excel today, if Excel does what they need it to do, that's okay. A tool is not a problem. The way that I would approach this situation is identify the places where the things that they're doing today are causing business inefficiencies and either a loss of revenue or an increase of wasted time and overhead. Quantify that, put a dollar amount or pound amount in front of it, and then go make a pitch to find that sponsor to get support for making the change that you believe is appropriate. All right, we'll do that. We have not a question, but when I speak to customers, the top question is always how I get there quickly. It's great to listen. Yes. So the journey, no matter where you are, even for the people that said, "Oh, my organization, we've got this really mature culture." There's always a journey, and there's always optimization that needs to take place. The thing that I would say is, in those customer conversations, try to center it as much as possible about their strategic business goals. Even though as business intelligence and data professionals, we are technical specialists. So we've invested years of our lives learning how data works and how the different data tools work and how to make them solve problems. But the technology itself it's meaningless. It's only meaningful when it's used to solve a problem. And in those customer conversations, it comes down to understanding what is important to them. And then your response will be grounded in their reality, to understand not how to get to the final destination quickly, but how to quickly deliver the short-term impact that will make the biggest difference and move them more closely towards their strategic business goals, because that's what it's going to define the success in the long term. And as an aside, I learned as a consultant before I joined Microsoft that by asking questions, so having these conversations, I could charge twice as much from my daily or hourly rate and do half as much, like deliver half as much, and have customers that were twice as happy by focusing on these strategic topics rather than focusing on the solutions. And I am not going to tell you a little about the swords on the wall because there is another question that is coming in, and I'm going to give it priority, and then we are going to be out of time. But basically, the responsibilities for the Center of Excellence in regards to the data culture, they basically come down to being the place where the people with the deep technical expertise and the deep business expertise can collaborate to provide tools, data, and resources for that broader community of practice. The idea of a center of excellence is very, very common. So I would say both look at my blog and video series to hear more about my thoughts on the topic, but Google it, go to your library. This is something that there's a body of knowledge more broadly out there. And for practically everything that we've talked about today, there's more to learn in the public domain. So this is everything that I have. I'm going to end with a quick reminder. I have a blog at ssbipolar.com. I am SQL Allfather on Twitter. And if you have additional questions that aren't covered by my existing series on building a data culture, my vacation, which starts in a little over 24 hours, I'm going to be working on series 2. So send me questions or topics on Twitter. Love your ideas to inform my upcoming work. So back over to you, Robert and Craig.